Okay, let's continue.
Thank you, Chair. So, sorry, can we go to FS 8 at 180? Just to recap, this letter from yourself to the Department of Human Settlements in the Free State introduces the JV for the first time, in fact, in this series of correspondence.
Chair, I wouldn't say it's for the first time. The first time the JV was introduced to us was when we submitted the proposal, which was around May of 2014.
No, you're entirely correct. What I'm putting is that in the correspondence that we've just been through,
Okay, yes.
between Free State, Gauteng, and the National Department, it's the first time it's placed on record.
Okay, that's correct, yeah.
We go over the page to FS 181, we see there a letter from Mr. Zulu to Mr. Mokesi, dated the 13th of August 2014. Now this letter deals with, on the face of it again, not the particular instruction to perform work emanating from Gauteng, but the database contract, in other words, the panel contract we've referred to it.
That's correct, Chair.
It also deals with Blackhead Consulting Pty Limited and not the joint venture.
That's correct.
One goes to the last letter in the series that I wanted to put to you, please. It's FS 8188. It's now the appointment letter that we've referred to in evidence before of 1st October 2014, addressed by Mr. Mokesi, the head of department in the Free State, to the Chief Executive Officer of Blackhead Consulting Pty Limited, JV. Correct?
That's correct.
And the second paragraph reads, the department wishes to advise that your company has been exclusively appointed for the audit and assessment of asbestos, handling of hazardous material, removal and disposal of asbestos contaminated, and then that next word is unclear rather, and replacement with SABC approved materials in the Free State province. I apologize, the letter is not very clear, but that is more or less what it says, except for one word which I could not read.
That's correct. Correct, Chair.
So what is apparent from this letter of appointment is that it's appointment of the JV as the exclusive service provider to do the work set out there. Correct?
That's correct, Chair.
And it also includes an appointment for handling of hazardous material, removal and disposal of asbestos contaminated material, and replacement with SABC approved materials in the Free State province.
That's correct.
If I could just summarize, because it's apparent that in relation to the extension of the contract from wherever it may have originated to the joint venture in the Free State, there is, to put it at its lowest, a great deal of confusion. If I could just summarize for you. In the first place, Mr. Makesi seeks to extend a national panel contract, and Mr. Zulu appears to cooperate in that. In the second place, Mr. Makesi seeks to extend the instruction to perform work in Gauteng. In the third place, Ms. Diedrichs seeks to extend a panel contract, not an instruction to perform work. In the fourth place, Diedrichs and Zulu, and up to a point, Makesi, talk about Blackhead. The appointment letter appoints the joint venture. And finally, we have the sole appointment of a joint venture, not of Blackhead, not of a panel arrangement, and not in accordance with the Gauteng instruction to perform work in terms and conditions, particularly in regard to price. That's a fair summary of what appears to lack clarity at the very least.
Correct, Chair.
If you could assist the Chair, please, Mr. Sodi, in relation to two issues, and that is to understand what you know of what work was done in the Free State and the costs of that work. You may be able to fill in some gaps that exist in the evidence thus far.
Yeah.
As I understand it, in your first statement, you said that virtually all of the work on the ground was carried out by the Ori Group.
Yeah, we subcontracted Master Trade, who subsequently contracted Ori Group to do the actual work. But at all times, sir, I was always, until much later, under the impression that it was Master Trade that was doing the actual work. I only found out much later when there was a dispute between Ori Group and Master Trade that in actual fact there was an entity called Ori Group. But at the beginning, that information was kept away from me. I was not aware about it.
At the time the Free State Department of Human Settlements agreed to pay you 850 Rand per unit, did they know that you were going to subcontract the work, substantially all the work, to Master Trade for 44 million Rand?
Chair, as far as I know, the department, at least from my side, was not informed that we were going to subcontract. I'm not sure if that conversation could have happened between my late partner and the department. It may have happened, I wouldn't know. But from my side, certainly there was no, that discussion never took place.
Did you not think to inform the department of the fact that you could, in fact, subcontract the work for a fraction of the price that they were going to pay?
Chair, in normal practice in the industry that we operate in, we often subcontract. But what remains is the contract is between two parties. In this case, the contract was between the Department of Human Settlements in the Free State together with the Blackhead Diamond Hill JV. So the expectation from the department was that the JV would do the work. But as it happens in the industry, you, from time to time, especially where you need services of a specialist nature, you would subcontract. But there's certainly no obligation, as far as I know, that you ought to disclose to the client that we are going to subcontract the work. It certainly doesn't happen in most cases. You are expected that you will deliver the work and you will be held responsible as the contracted party to deliver on what you're supposed to deliver. So in most cases, it's not a requirement at all that you need to come back or disclose to the client to say, client, listen, yes, we acknowledge that you gave us this work, but we are actually going to use the services of a subcontractor. It hardly happens in the industry.
Arising from your answer now, Mr. Sodi, do I understand it to say that it's common practice when contractors do work with a province or a national department for these or for similar subcontracting arrangements to take place? It happens often.
It happens quite often, Chair. Yeah.
I can, up to a certain point, understand within maybe certain contexts a situation where a department or any client says, I'm giving you this work. You know what the standards are that must be met. I will hold you responsible. I don't really care whether you do the work or somebody else does the work, but if you let somebody do the work who ends up not meeting the standard expected, you will be accountable.
That's correct.
Up to a certain level, I can understand that.
Yeah.
But also I can understand a situation where the client would say, I'm giving you the work because you have put up a proposal to me. You have convinced me that you have got the expertise to do this job and the experience. I don't want anybody else to do the work, because if I wanted somebody else, I would have given it to somebody else. I wanted you to do the job. So as far as I'm concerned, it's not permissible for you, having got the job from me, to give it to somebody else.
Yeah, of course, Chair. If that is specified.
Let me qualify that.
Yeah.
It's unacceptable. It's not going to be permissible for you to give it to somebody else without my permission.
Yeah. So to respond to that, Chair, if it's made very clear by the client that, listen, Mr. Blackhead, we're giving you this project and we expect you to do the work. We don't expect anyone else to do the work on your behalf. But you, because you presented to us that you are capable and that you are indeed have the necessary skill and experience and qualifications to do the work. So we expect you to do the work. If that is specified, whether be it in an SLA or whatever contract, then indeed we will have to abide by those instructions. But if such is not specified anyway, we would typically do it the same way that we do with a whole lot of other projects, where we say, look, at the end of the day, it is our responsibility to make sure the job gets done. It gets done properly. It gets done according to the standards that would have been set by the client. If anything goes wrong, We can't now turn and say, well, Mr. Client, we appointed someone else to do the work, they messed up, so deal with them. We would still be accountable for anything that goes on. So the responsibility still lies with us as the service provider to make sure that the product is up to the satisfaction of the client.
Mr. Pretorius?
You understand, Mr. Sodi, that when the state or when the executive or when the administration spends money in a procurement exercise, it's bound by not only constitutional provisions, but a host of other legislative provisions and treasury regulations. You know that. And the Constitution says that when money is spent, it must be cost effective. You understand? You know that, do you? Anyway, you can trust me, that's what the Constitution says in Section 217.
Okay.
In order for a State Department to know that it is embarking upon a procurement exercise which must be cost effective, quite apart from being fair and transparent and the like, it needs to have all the information at its disposal. You would agree with that?
I would agree with it.
So, and this is not your responsibility, because I understand as a businessman you might well say, well, it's up to the department to do its homework. Here's my bid. They
Correct.
can give me the work or they don't have to. Correct.
That's correct.
But in relation to the department, if they had known that firstly you were to subcontract, and secondly, had they known the terms and conditions of the subcontract, they would have been in a better position to ensure that the contract was, from their point of view, cost effective. Would you agree with that?
Well, Chair, it could be that, yes, that would have assisted the department to come to that determination. But let's bear in mind that what happened in this case was there was a negotiation with regard to the fee that was ultimately agreed upon between the two parties. The Department of Human Settlements in this case, and I'm certainly not speaking on their behalf, they can maybe speak to that point. My assumption is that they were guided as well. Because remember I said no one had done this sort of project prior to Gauteng. So they were guided by the fee or the price that was charged in Gauteng, which was in a way some kind of a precedent, if one wants to put it that way. And I explained previously when I was here that the reason why the Free State fee was higher than Gauteng was to then take care of the unknown factors that I explained. You know, the fact that now we're dealing with the entire province, not just certain parts of the Free State. Now we're dealing with the entire province. So certainly from their point of view, they would have said, okay, we've got a benchmark in terms of price. The benchmark is 650 rands. We know it because it has happened. Service providers were appointed on that. And certainly when we negotiated, we said, look, yes, that's what we got.
Yes, I know I'm interrupting you, Mr. Sodi.
Yeah.
But I think the point that Mr. Pretorius wishes you to comment on is a very narrow one, a very narrow point.
Okay.
That I think he wishes you to comment on.
Yeah.
Namely, this project was not done in a cost-effective manner from the point of view of the department. How that came about might be a matter for debate, but
Sure.
that's a fact. You accept that. You accept that.
I
You
do
accept
accept
that.
it. Yeah.
That's point one. Point two, had the department known what we now know, namely that there was or would be an entity that could do this job for much less, there is no reason why we should think they would have been prepared to pay so much to you. You accept that?
I do accept that.
Yes.
I do accept that, Chair. And
Yes.
just to add on to that, Chair, you would remember, I also mentioned the last time that I was here, that from the very beginning, when we started engaging the department, and when we wrote that first letter, it was never anticipated at all that the project was going to be subcontracted, at least from my point of view, because we had done this. So I didn't even entertain that thought. It never even occurred to me that we may get to that stage. Until much later, when Mr. Mpabani approached me and asked me if I could, be available for a presentation by Master Trade. He convinced me and eventually I agreed. And I said, I'm fine, let's meet, let me listen to the presentation, which I did. And I also mentioned that I was shocked by the cost proposal. My first instinct was they're not going to be able to execute the project at that price. That was my first instinct. And that was followed by me approaching or saying to Mr. Mpumani that you need to speak to these guys because I have my doubts, that they'll be able to do the project at that price. I think you should go speak to them and verify that, which he did, and he came back and he said, look, these guys, they're happy, they're comfortable. Of course, Chair, we know, and I said that, when we implemented, we didn't have the technology that these guys demonstrated during the presentation. And we know technology introduces optimization, and efficiencies. But I certainly didn't think that the optimization and the efficiencies would greatly reduce the cost of doing this project to an extent that it did. Because all along, and based on my experience of the Gauteng project, I anticipated that we will spend more, give or take, around 50% or so as the cost of doing the business. That's what I thought. But of course, as it turned out, these guys presented, they said, look, we've got the most recent advanced technology, and you will be able to realize some efficiencies and optimization, and that's exactly what happened.
Of course, it would appear that, to say the least, the Free State Department of Human Settlements did not do its homework properly in arriving at the amount that they arrived at per house. Because had they known that in Gauteng you had made the kind of profit that you had made, they should have said, no, but you shouldn't make such a big profit out of this, therefore we will reduce the amount.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Chair, can I be honest with you?
Yeah.
I wouldn't have told them the profit margin that I would have made. so I may have said to them, guys, I made, my profit margin was 20%. We're business people, so we always want to capitalize,
Would you not have been truthful with them? Would you not have been truthful with them?
I'm just being honest, Chair.
Mr. Pretorius.
You see, Mr. Sedi, as a prominent businessman and as someone who's frequently done work with state organs, it's not the chair's duty only to deal with this matter. He has to look at cost effectiveness
Yeah.
across the board in all procurement,
Yeah,
because the country is facing serious problems, which
Absolutely.
has given rise, amongst other things, to this inquiry.
yeah,
So in that sense, we are asking specific questions, but they also have a general relevance and
Yeah.
a general import.
yeah, yeah.
But when a service provider tenders for a contract or makes a proposal, as in this case, an unsolicited bid, it is incumbent upon both the service provider and the state organ providing the work to ensure that what processes take place are lawful and result in a constitutionally compliant procurement process. One of the conditions or requirements is that it be cost effective. You accept all that, do you?
I accept that.
Now,
Chair.
it may well be that you say, as you've just said, I'm a businessman, I'm entitled to make my profit, I don't have to disclose my profit. It's up to the department to make sure that it gives out work in accordance with its requirements and its statutory duties.
That's
That
correct.
argument may or may not be a good one, but I don't want to debate it with you.
Okay.
The point that the chair has just made and that I would like to ask you about is that in order to comply with its own duties, a department should either do its own homework or make sure it gets full information from a service provider. That's, if
no,
the department is going to complain
Yeah.
that it entered into a contract which was not cost effective and to the benefit of the taxpayer, it can only legitimately complain if somehow it's been misled. It's up to it to do its homework,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
But there's a provision in our law and regulations which caters for this, and that's the competitive bidding process. Because in the competitive bidding process, you would have had a competitor, which, although it wouldn't have seen your bid, would have known that in order to win the business, it would have to come in with a cost-effective and competitive bid. The point I want to make is that the very process that would have ensured cost-effectiveness here was absent. And it was absent because of the very complex and confusing attempts to extend the contract, which we will submit in due course, clearly unlawful.
Chair, can I would like to make a submission that certainly from our point of view, we complied with what needed to be complied with in order to give effect to Treasury Regulation 16A 6.6. Of course, I don't know the mechanics of how that works. But I do have a broader view, a broader understanding, rather, of how it works, but not in so much detail. I mean, over the years, I've come to, because of this process, understand that it has to work in a certain way. But at the time, I understood it to mean exactly what we did from our side. And one would have expected that the department, in this case, would have made sure that all the provisions of that regulations are complied with, which I wouldn't have known. And I doubt if Mr. Mpambani would have known that either. So from our side, as a service provider who wanted to get work, we certainly, believe that we complied with what we need to comply with. And that's my submission to that point, Chair.
Well, I just wanted to say, of course, you didn't comply when you made that misrepresentation in the proposal. That part was not compliance.
Correct, sir, but at the time, I didn't know that I wasn't complying. Like I explained my, and I don't want to go back to what I explained of, if you put a proposal through a JV or consortium or partnership, that if one of the members of the partnership or the consortium...
Oh, no, we're not on the same page.
Okay.
You're thinking of a different point.
Okay,
No, the point I was making, you remember the misrepresentations we talked about on your first day in regard to the handling of asbestos? And removal.
Okay, all right.
So that's the part I'm talking
Okay,
about.
I get it.
In regard to that, that was not compliance,
Okay,
that you
Chair.
accept. Yeah.
Okay, I accept that, yeah.
Just to deal briefly, Mr. Sodi, with the subcontracting issue. You recall in the service level agreement, and I can refer you to FS 8191 at paragraph 4.1. In accordance with that service level agreement, you undertook to execute the project in line with the agreement, the approved instruction to perform work, and the applicable legislation and regulations. That was an undertaking by the service provider.
I'm sorry,
Paragraph 4.
on what page are you?
FS 8191.
191, okay.
4.2 reads, the service provider undertakes that they have the capacity to and are able to enter into this agreement. 4.2.2, they have all the necessary experience, skill and capability to render the service in accordance with the requirements and expectations of the department. From these clauses, it appears that the contents of the service level agreement indicated that you could do the work and you would do the work.
That's correct, Chair, but the service level agreement it does not say that we are not entitled to subcontract the works. It is very silent when it comes to that point, and this is the point I made earlier, that if it was specified...
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you.
Okay.
What Mr. Pretorius is putting to you is that you, the JV, and the department are entering into this agreement, and no one else.
Correct, yes.
And that what this 4.2 says
Yeah.
is that you are saying to the other party to the agreement, namely the department, we have the capacity
Correct.
and the ability to do this.
That's
work.
correct, yes.
You are not saying we don't have the capacity, we don't have the ability, so you are entering into a contract with somebody who will give the job to somebody else because they don't have the capacity. He is saying, you are saying to the department, you are entering into a contract with the right people. Because
That's
they've got
correct.
the capacity,
Yes.
they've got the ability.
That's correct, Chair.
You agree with that?
I agree with it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
You were dealing earlier in your recent testimony, Mr. Sodi, with the timing of the subcontracting arrangements. When were those, according to your knowledge, entered into?
Chair, again, I'm speaking under correction, but I think this was around October, November of 2014, somewhere around. Can't recall the exact date, but it was maybe a month or so before we started with the actual work.
Well, that would have been after the letter of appointment of 1 October 2014.
Correct, yeah.
Mr. Manyeke, who testified earlier in this series of issues, You know who he is.
I know him.
He's the owner of Ori,
That's
the
correct.
second subcontractor.
Yeah.
He gave evidence on the 7th of August 2020, and I'm referring to the transcript of his evidence, Chair, at page 15. And I recall this in any event, because I put the following question to him after he gave a history of his involvement and the involvement of Master Trade, the first subcontractor, with the joint venture. And I put it to him as a conclusion of his evidence. So the arrangement with Mpambani of the joint venture with Master Trade that you would be a subcontractor to do the whole of the work was discussed, it appears, and agreed in principle before the contract with the joint venture and the Gauteng Department of Human Settlements was finalized. That is how I understand your affidavit. Mr. Manyike, yes, that is correct. That is correct. Do you have any comment on that?
Well, Chair, my comment to that is, and I've alluded to this point previously, that it appeared that there were parallel discussions that were happening between Mr. Mpambani and Mr. Master Trade Sydney and Khotso as well, which I was not aware of. So it's possible that they started having this discussion about Master Trade coming on board long before we signed that subcontract agreement with them. And I'm not surprised, and I won't be surprised if that was the case. Because like I said, even when he came to me, initially, like I said, I was very reluctant right at the beginning when he said to me that, you know, would you mind if we listen to these guys? And I was like, but why do we even have to listen to these guys? Because we're going to do this job ourselves. We've got the experience, we've got the skill, we've got the capacity. Why should we even listen to someone else? We're going to do this. We've got the resources. And he was adamant that, no, listen to them, and, you know, you don't have to say yes, you know, but listen to them and hear what they say. And reluctantly agreed and you know, made myself available to that presentation. But, you know, as I would have said here, there is a relationship, prior relationship, that existed between Mr. Khadebe and Mr. Mpambani for many, many years. So it's highly probable that he would have said to him, listen, I don't think Mr. Sodi is going to have a problem with this. You guys are going to do the job. It's possible. Seeing the character, the kind of character that we know him to be, and that I came to know him to be later on. That he could have simply said to these guys, I'll speak to him. You know, he will get this thing done. So don't worry. So certainly I wasn't surprised with Mr. Manyika's evidence here when he said there were discussions that were taking place. But I was not party to those discussions. And I could believe indeed those discussions were happening long before we even signed, or long before they even came to do the presentation. They may have had their own arrangement. So that's my point, my submission to that.
Well, for present purposes, we can put it no higher than that it is strange that two business partners don't know how they're going to execute a project of this nature at the time they're signing up the agreement.
Are you referring to myself and Mr.
Mpambani?
No, I knew how the project was going to be executed. I had not even once anticipated that we were going to subcontract it.
Then I don't understand the answer. You didn't know how the project was going to be
Let him
executed
finish, Mr.
because you
Pretorius.
didn't know of the subcontractors. That's the point I'm making.
Okay.
And I find that strange.
Hang on, Mr. Pretorius. He had not finished.
Sure.
Yes. So
Yeah.
what I'm trying to explain, Chair, is it was never anticipated from my side that we would eventually subcontract. It was certainly not once mentioned to me by Mr. Mpambani that he would prefer us to subcontract, right up until the last minute, when he came with this proposal. So from call it May of 2014 to about October, there was certainly no discussion at all between the two of us about having to subcontract the project to someone else. That discussion never happened
Yes.
for that amount, for that period of time.
Yes, and I think what Mr. Pretorius is saying is, to the extent that Mr. Mpambani may have contemplated that the execution of this contract would entail subcontracting, and you had contemplated that there would be no subcontracting, it is strange that two partners who are about to do the same job, execute this contract, didn't have the same understanding as to how it was going to be executed. That's my understanding of what Mr. Pretorius is saying to you. What do you say to that?
My short and quick answer to that, sir, is Mr. Mpambani may have had his own expectations. He may have had his own plans. And I certainly came to realize much later that he did have his own plans and, and so forth. And that is demonstrated by the fact that he did not conduct himself in a manner that he should have, in the spirit of a partnership, as we had envisaged it and as we had recorded it in our partnership or JV agreement. And that point, sir, is demonstrated by two things. It's demonstrated by the insistence from Mr. Mpambani to utilize the services of a subcontractor. That's one. Two, that when a payment was made into the JV account, Mr. Mpambani, instead of acting in accordance with the agreement that, costs would be, or expenses rather, would be deducted and whatever remains would be shared equally. In the last payment, he transferred the entire funds into his personal account. And that became a subject of litigation and so forth and civil action. So you would expect in a normal environment that partners who work together would know what ought to happen, how things have to happen. But if you've got one of the partners having ulterior motives, such things would happen, as it happened in this case. And I'm sorry, Chair, I don't want to speak ill of those that have departed, may his soul rest in peace, but this is exactly what happened. I got into a contract or into a partnership with someone who was not honorable. And this is why we see some of the things, dealing with some of the things that we're dealing with.
In fairness to you, Mr. Sodi, I should put on record that the master trade quote was accepted by the joint venture on the 25th of October 2014. That accords with what you have just told.
That's
Chair.
correct.
And the appointment of Ori, the second subcontractor, was made on the 31st of October 2014. That also seems to accord with your recollection, at least of the sequence of it. We've been a bit distracted down the subcontracting detour, but let's get back to the work and the cost of the work.
Okay.
There are certain gaps that need to be filled in.
Sure.
There is, according to your statement, a second phase of the project, and I'm not talking now about the removal and rebuilding phase, but the capturing and analysis of the data that has been produced by the work on the ground. Do I understand your evidence correctly? And we can go to your statement if you wish. That was conducted by Mr. Manyeke, Mr. Zwane, and Mr. Matar. And Zwane and Matar were employed directly by the joint venture. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, and let me just maybe give context to that, Chair. So the second phase we're referring to, so you're quite correct, Mr. Pretorius. What would have happened in this case was the first phase, as we would call it, would be the capturing of the data on the ground. So the data would be captured by the field workers using the gadgets that we referred to, going through, questions that would have been given to them. That information gets collected from house to house. It then gets fed into, call it a central depository. And once it's there, then it has to be analyzed. This is now the second phase that Mr. Pretorius is referring to. So we would have we had engineers, team of engineers that sat in the office and they receive this information and then they analyze it. The culmination of it, it's a report which then gets to be produced and given to the client. So Mr. Zwane, as I said earlier on, was brought into the project because I wanted him to make sure that what gets produced is what is expected of us, because he was involved in the Gauteng project. He was assisted by Mr. Motel, who's a qualified civil engineer as well. So they would have, made sure that the data that is collected is analyzed properly, reports are generated together with Mr. Manyeke, and then ultimately they would be submitted to the client. So that is the second phase that Mr. Pretorius is referring to.
All right. And that work was performed, as I understand your statement at least, by Messrs. Manyeke, Zwane, and Matar.
That's correct.
If you would go please to FS 8, page 66.
Did you say page what? Page 66?
66, Joe. This is a spreadsheet that has been the subject matter of a great deal of testimony before the chair. It's headed Free State Asbestos Eradication Project, and there are a number of entries on the spreadsheet. And I'd like to deal with some of them for the present, but for the present, just to establish the costs that you may be able to assist us with. You will see there, under the head Free State Asbestos Eradication Project, number of units 300,000. That is the number of units involved in this project. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So it's a correct reflection of that fact.
In as far as those number of units,
Yes.
definitely it's correct. Right?
And rate P/U, we can assume that that's rate per unit, 850 Rand. That's
correct.
also a correct reflection of an external fact.
That's correct.
The project value, 255 million Rand, also a correct reflection of an external fact.
That's correct.
that's just by way of introduction. The column on the left-hand side, if one goes down a little way, you'll see the name Master Trade. That was Master Trade, the subcontractor.
That's correct.
And next to it is an amount of 44,208,567 rand 90 cents. Now that is the amount quoted to the Free State Department. You know that?
No, that's the amount that was agreed between the JV and Master Trade.
Yes, quoted and agreed.
That's correct, yeah.
And it's correct to the last cent.
That's correct, yeah.
Now, how that amount is made up is of less significance to the larger issues that the Chair has to consider. But we do know that that amount comprised several payments and several other amounts. For example, there was an upfront payment of 4.4 million rand, which has been discussed today.
That's correct, yeah.
There were 3 other amounts paid to the FNB account of Master Trade, amount of 13,283,427 rand 16 cents, 22 million rand 600,170 rand 74 cents, and an amount of 600,000 rand. I don't expect you to recall the detail to the last rand and cents, but the charges of the subcontractor Master Trade were paid over a period of time, I understand.
That's correct.
Including an upfront payment of 4.4 million rand.
That's correct.
And Mr. Khadebi of Master Trade maintains that he still has a claim against the joint venture in an amount of 3.7 million. He may not be justified, according to you, in making that claim, but that's what he says.
I'm aware of that, and I'm not sure how he arrived at that amount. Because as far as I'm concerned, the amount of 44 million was paid to Master Trade.
Right. That amount...
Plus the change. That's the amount that we...
Yes. And plus, you'll see in the extreme right-hand column, not in the table, next to the name Master Trade, 4.4 million rand payment.
That's correct.
Or what is represented to be a 4.4 million rand payment, and you say that was a prepayment that was actually made.
Yes, that's correct.
So that's another external fact which is verified in this schedule. Correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Mr. Zwane, you've spoken about him and his role. Does his name appear here? I think you've told the investigators about this.
His first name is Martin.
Yes.
And I would assume that Martin refers to him.
That Martin refers to Martin Zwane.
I would assume that, yeah.
Who was employed by you, or his company might have been employed by you, Zenawi.
That's correct.
He invoiced the joint venture in an amount of 1.5 million rand. You know that? I can take you there if you want. Would you like to see it?
No, I'm aware of it.
Okay, so Mr. Zwane, depicted here as Martin, did invoice the company for 1.5 million rand. So those are external facts correctly reflected in the schedule. You nod your head.
Yeah, correct.
Thank you. And in your statement, we needn't go to the reference because it's not in dispute. You confirm FS 1396, para 39.8, that the amount of 1.5 million rand was in fact paid to Zwane.
Yeah, according to my recollection, it was paid to him.
There is a record produced by the investigators showing other payments to Zenawi or Mr. Zwane, but they're not directly relevant to this project, I understand.
I used, well, Mr. Zwane worked for Blackhead from time to time, over and above this particular project. So the payments that you're referring to may be related to other projects or other work that he did outside of the asbestos project.
Then underneath Martin, we see Steve. Do you know who that is?
Again, I would make a calculated guess that this would refer to Steve Motel, who I've already mentioned, was part of the engineering team.
Yes.
That was responsible for the data analysis.
And according to your statement, we can just go there. You said you couldn't recall how much was paid to him.
No, I couldn't recall
So
offhand.
you wouldn't be able to verify that amount at 1.2 million rand as being the correct amount?
No, I couldn't. I'm not able to verify it now, but it could be that's the amount that was paid to him. We can double check that. It's not going to be a difficult exercise.
All right. We could go to FS1 at 395, please.
What's the page number?
395.
Okay.
This is part of your first affidavit.
That's correct.
And in paragraph 39, you say you were shown the spreadsheet.
That's correct.
Now, as I understand your evidence, which is contained in the statement, you know that Mr. Mpambani prepared the spreadsheet on your computer in your office.
That's correct, Chair.
And I understand you to have said further there's nothing extraordinary in that,
Correct.
because he used your office regularly, and I presume he used your computer regularly. Is that correct?
Not my computer regularly, but on this particular occasion, he didn't have his laptop with him when he came to the office.
Did you watch him prepare the spreadsheet?
I didn't watch him prepare the spreadsheet, as I was in another meeting, Chair. But we had a discussion prior to him preparing the spreadsheet. And the discussion was centered around getting a spreadsheet done that would detail the expenses of the project. And those expenses, we knew, the two of us, related to the SABC, or the master trade, and the other guys that we used, like Steve and Martin. So he worked on it, and I was in another meeting. And what then happened was he then emailed, he told me that he emailed the spreadsheet to his computer because he was going to do further work on it. I didn't read much into it, and I certainly didn't go through the spreadsheet that he had prepared, because in my view it was a straightforward spreadsheet that had to be prepared, just to deal with the expenses of the project.
Right. So I understand the position to be you are in your offices together with Mr. Mpambani. You're not.
That's correct, yeah?
He and you have a discussion about the preparation of a spreadsheet. Correct.
That's
Or a
correct.
schedule. Correct. And your understanding of that arrangement was that a spreadsheet would be prepared by Mr. Mpambani which would reflect costs attributable to the Free State project business.
That's correct. And if I can add on that, Chair, we didn't leave it at just cost. We discussed what those costs were. And those costs related to the service, to master trade. It related to Mr. Zwani. It related to Mr. Motel. So it was very specific what costs we're talking about when I left him and went into another meeting. Those were the costs that he was going to reflect, including the revenue that would come from the project. So that was supposed to be captured on the spreadsheet.
Well, it was an important document, I would understand, because revenue minus costs equals your profit. In other words, you would be able to see from the spreadsheet how much money would ultimately accrue to you as profit.
That was the whole objective, Chair.
And I take it as a businessman, experienced businessman, the revenue minus costs and your ultimate profit is an important calculation to see that it's properly done.
Absolutely, Chair.
Because
Absolutely.
all the costs are going to be deducted from your profit ultimately.
That's correct.
And in fact, the arrangement, as I understand it, was that at least at this stage, was that the profits would be split in equal shares between Blackhead and Diamond Hill, the partners in the joint venture.
That's correct, Chair. That was in accordance with the JV agreement that we had signed, that we would subtract the costs and the expenses of the project, and whatever then remained would have been split equally between Blackhead Consulting and Diamond Hill. So that was essentially the purpose of the spreadsheet, to say, this is how much the project is going to bring in revenue. This is how much we're going to spend to execute the project. And this is how much is going to remain. And based on what remains, then 50% of that would go to Blackhead and 50% would go to Diamond Hill. So that was the long and short of it. It was meant to do exactly that. Nothing less, nothing more.
Okay. As I understand it, you left Mr. Mpambani to create the spreadsheet or prepare the spreadsheet on your computer, on the understanding that you would see it later.
I left him to, after we had discussed what the spreadsheet ought to reflect. I had another meeting in the adjacent boardroom, and I left him to then prepare that particular spreadsheet. I didn't anticipate that it was going to take long because we knew exactly what was going to be reflected there. I went into the adjacent boardroom and had my meeting there. And when I was done, he was also done with the spreadsheet. And then his words were, I've emailed the spreadsheet to my computer, okay, because I've got additional work to do on it. I didn't read much into that statement. I figured out additional work might mean he wants to double check the figures in the spreadsheet, and I left it there.
Can you recall more or less when this conversation and preparation took place in your office on your computer?
Chair, I cannot recall the exact date, but it was in 2014. I would be misleading the commission if I want to start guesstimating the dates, but it was definitely in 2014. I can't recall exactly when it was.
In paragraph 39.20, FS 1398, you deal with an email which I presume is the same email. Is that the email you were referring to in a moment ago when you said that the spreadsheet was emailed back to you?
That's correct, Chair.
That appears in FS 8. Well, there's another reference in FS 9 at page 281 to 284.
Which bundle is that?
FS 9, Chair.
FS 9.
So what's the page again, Mr. Fitzwallace?
281, we'll start there. Well, first let's go to 284. That's the spreadsheet, is it? Otherwise referred to as the cost of business schedule. Then on 283, we have an email. It reads, firstly, it's dated the 28th of March, 2015. It's addressed to Edwin. Its title is Fees Calculation. It says, this is a draft message. It says, sure, Eddie, that's SHO. Please note that payments highlighted in yellow are the ones you will take care of, and rest us, as discussed. I have effected the payments in 2 batches. Kindly find attached the updated schedule with the following minor adjustments. JT from 1 million rand to 500,000 rand. Do you recall receiving this email?
I recall receiving this email, Chair, but I need to add that my understanding of the email was there was funds that came into the account from the client, and Mr. Mpambani, who was the transactor from day one, was going to make the payment in 2 batches, meaning the 1 batch is payment that goes to Blackhead Consulting, and the second batch being payment that goes to Diamond Hill. That was my understanding of this.
Yes. That, of course, is partly in dispute in the court case, but I don't want to go there, the dispute between yourselves and the estate of Mr. Mpambani. I don't want to go there, but If one goes to 28282 of FS9, one sees the same email, but it's no longer a draft email. No, it's not the same email. It deals with the same issue. It's from Ego, Diamond Hill. Ego is Mr. Mpambani's first name.
That's correct, yeah.
Sure, Eddie. It reads, I have effected the payments in 2 batches. Kindly find attached the updated schedule with the following minor adjustments. JT from 1 million rand to 500,000 rand. And your details appear in the email chain below that. You nod again.
Yeah, I acknowledge it.
And then part of the email chain appears on page 281 of FS9, but there's no content on that page. Now, according to your statement, and we'll come back to this, you say in paragraph 39.21, you never discussed payments. I presume payments on the schedule with Mr. Mpambani.
To which page have you now gone, Mr. Pretorius?
We're on page FS1398.
398.
Yes. Well, let's first deal with another matter just in relation to the schedule itself. If one goes back to the schedule, Free State 8, page 66, one sees at the bottom on the left-hand side upfront payments 4.4 million rand. As I understand from your statement, that is an amount you paid to Mr. Khadebe as an upfront payment. Mr. Khadebe being from Master Trade.
That's correct, Chair.
And you gave that information to Mr. Mpambani so that he could include it in the spreadsheet.
That's correct. That's correct,
And
Chair.
it's a correct reflection of a factual payment
That's correct, Chair.
based on information you gave to Mr. Mpambani. Correct.
That's correct, Chair.
All right, let's go back. When the email that we've just discussed was sent to you, that's the email of 28 March 2015, or that at the time of that email chain, was the schedule returned to you?
I cannot recall if the schedule, Chair, was, you're referring to the spreadsheet.
Spreadsheet cost of business schedule, yes.
I do not recall if it was returned to me at all.
When did you see it again?
To be honest, I saw this spreadsheet during the session that I had with the investigators. They presented me with this spreadsheet, and I said, it's the first time that I'm seeing it. I did not author the spreadsheet. I'm not the author of the spreadsheet, but I did have a discussion with Mr. Mpambani on a spreadsheet which I've already explained, which was meant to detail the expenses of the project. But this particular spreadsheet, I saw it for the first time when I had a meeting with the investigators.
When did you learn that your share of the profits amounted to 86,195,716 rand and 5 cents?
So on the day that that Mr. Mpambani worked on the spreadsheet, remember I said we had already discussed what the expenses were. All that needed to happen was that it had to be recorded on a spreadsheet. But during that meeting, which would have been somewhere in 2014. We already knew upfront what the costs were. It was not difficult to make a calculation of what the cost was. So I knew at that time how much was going to be the share, which would have been Blackhead's share from the profits of the project.
Well, let's just look at that, please, Mr. Sodi. You expected income of 255 million rand.
That's correct. That was the project value.
The subcontractor, Master Trade, would be paid 44 million rand.
That's correct, Chair.
That leaves 211 million rand.
That's
profit.
correct, Chair.
And there would be some expenses for Mr. Zwane and Motel.
That's correct, Chair.
And we know those aren't significant amounts.
That's correct.
So did it not concern you that if you take your 86 million rand, you add another 86 million rand, you get approximately 172 million rand? There's nearly 30 million rand missing.
Chair, I said we discussed on the day the expenses of the project. I cannot recall if it was 86 million or it was some other figure, but we knew that 44 million was going to be paid to Master Trade, and those other amounts that would have been paid to Mr. Zwane and Mr. Motel. The difference between that and the 255 would have been the profit margin. And that was the purpose for which we had to get that spreadsheet done. So it had to record that. But as I indicated, Mr. Mpaman mentioned that he had emailed it to himself so that he can do further work on it. So I didn't bother to ask what further work are you referring to or that is going to happen on the spreadsheet. So I'm certainly not confirming that my profit margin would have been 86 million, but I'm saying that it would have been the difference between the 255 and the 44 plus the other amounts that we spoke about.
All right, well, let's look at that. Your expected income was 255 million rand, correct? You knew and discussed that a spreadsheet would be prepared where the costs of Master Trade would be recorded, 44 million rand.
That's correct.
And I'm rounding the figure off. Martin Zwane, 1.5 million rand. And Steve, you say you don't know, but are you happy to consider that figure of 1.2 million rand as being accurate?
I'm happy with that, Chair, yeah.
So that's 47 million rand. Correct?
Correct, yeah.
Well, let's round it off to 48 million rand because it's 47.9 million. Okay?
Correct.
So one has 48 million rand coming off as expenses of an income of 255 million rand. That is 207 million rand. Correct?
That's correct.
Your half share of that would have been 103.5 million rand.
That's correct, Chair.
But according to this spreadsheet, you're only getting 86 million rand. Weren't you interested in where this money had disappeared to?
No, hence I'm saying, I only got to see, Chair, this spreadsheet when it was presented to me by the investigators. I don't know how that 86 million rand was arrived at. I don't know if Mr. Mpamani is the one that put these figures. I wouldn't know how he made those sort of calculations.
Well, remember that there are court papers and a whole lot of other documents which we can look at.
Yeah,
We may have to ask you in due course to deal with that.
correct.
But for the present, I find it rather strange that you wouldn't have known your profit or interrogated your profit until You were until the investigator spoke to you last year, some 3 or
No.
4 years later.
Chair, this is how the project was executed, and it's very simple. There's nothing complicated about it. We knew what the costs were going to be, and these are the costs that we referred to. And those costs were going to be paid to Master Trade and those two individuals that we referred to. What would have remained was an amount that would be shared equally between the two parties. And that's exactly what happened, Jay. Right up until the very last payment, which was handled in a different way by the late Mr. Mpambani. But any amount that came into the project, into the JV account, would be subject to minusing the expenses, and a lot of these expenses were minused, in the first few payments that came through. And then subsequent to that, whatever that was in the account would be split equally. So I had absolutely no problem at all, or never had doubt that, this is how it was going to be. And it was certainly done in that way, up until, as I said, the very last payment, which was then handled differently.
When did you know that, according to Mr. Mpambani at least, you were only entitled to 86 million rand? Or Blackhead was only entitled to 86 million rand, and not 103.5 million rand?
Chair, as I've indicated, most of these figures that are on the spreadsheet where I saw this for the first time last year. If one does a calculation, it's very easy for us to actually get those records, to see exactly how much was paid to Blackhead Consulting. Because that information is there. It's there in the bank accounts, it's there in our statements. I cannot verify right now whether it was 86 million, but that information is there. So this 86 million, so I don't know how Mr. Mpambani arrived at these figures. But I can certainly demonstrate that bar for the last payment, all the other payments that came in were subjected to minusing only this cost that I'm referring to here, and then what then remained would have been shared equally.
So are you saying that the principle on which you and Mr. Mpambani had agreed was that once the costs of the project had been deducted, the two of you, that is your companies, would share the profit equally? That's the first point.
That's correct.
Second point, are you saying that as at the time when Mr. Mpambani was preparing the spreadsheet that you and he talked about on a particular day when you were having another meeting, both of you knew what the costs of the project were? Is that right?
That's correct, Chair. Yeah.
And therefore, both of you knew that once those costs had been deducted from the value of the project, then you would share the balance equally.
That's correct, Chair.
All right.
Yeah.
Are you also saying that in terms of the money that came into Blackhead's account, that money, if you leave out for the time being the last payment, was in accordance with that agreement?
Absolutely correct, sir.
Are you saying there was no amount, there was no money which appeared to have gone to anybody other than persons or entities that you were supposed to pay for as the JV.
That's absolutely correct, sir.
That's what you are saying.
Yeah, and sir, to add on to that, we have the JV account, which shows the monies that, or the funds that went into the account. The statements also indicate how much went into Diamond Hill and how much went into Blackhead. And the statements also further indicate that the only other payments that occurred from the JV account are payments in relation to Master Trade as well as the other individuals that we worked. Nothing more. So that's why I'm saying we can confidently present that information to say X amount went into the JV. These are the expenses which we know, which I've spoken about. These are the expenses. They were minused, okay, from whatever that was paid, and the difference was then equally split into the two entities.
But of course, if for argument's sake, there were what I would call illegal payments to be made,
Yeah.
it is possible that the arrangement or understanding between the two partners could be that we have received money from a government department as a joint venture. To the extent that there are some people that we must pay, and those payments are illegal payments, I will have my own, you will have your own, but we'll deduct legitimate costs, if you know what I mean. Legal ones. We'll deduct those, and then from the profit after the legal ones have been deducted, we'll give you your half, I'll take my half, but you must know that from your half, you must take care of the illegal ones. That's conceptually possible.
It's possible, Chair.
Yeah.
And can I, at this point,
Yes.
Chair, speak on my behalf
Yeah,
and on behalf of Blackhead Consulting?
yeah.
Because I certainly didn't have access
Yes,
into Diamond Hill account.
yes.
But I can categorically state that the funds that were paid into Blackhead Consulting were funds that were due to Blackhead Consulting. There is no one else who was paid from the funds that went into our account, not a single individual. So if there were payments that were made elsewhere, I wouldn't have known. There's certainly no payments or illegal payments that were paid from the JV, because as much as I was the signatory to the account, I wasn't the transactor, but I had access to it. So I could monitor and see what was going on. And to that extent, I can confidently say there is no illegal payment that came from the JV account. Equally so, there is no illegal payment that came from Blackhead. I don't know about the other side.
Yeah. Well, the one part which you might help me understand is the part of the email that says, from Mr. Mbambani to you, that says, as I understand it at least, you must take care of certain payments. He will take care of certain payments.
Yeah.
Now, if those payments relate to the cost of the business, why are they not being paid from the joint account?
I certainly didn't pay attention to that email, sir.
Yes. But can you see what I mean?
I see what you're saying, and I can
Because,
understand.
if it's legitimate cost of the business, here is a joint account.
Yeah.
The principle you have agreed upon, the two of you, is we pay the costs first. and we share equally what remains. There's a joint account. There is no reason why the payments of those accounts shouldn't happen from the joint account, and then you share the two, so that when you receive your portion, you don't have to pay anybody.
No, you're absolutely correct.
Yes.
You're absolutely, hence I'm saying I didn't pay attention to that email. I probably read it in haste. But as I said, I understood it to mean, when he was talking about payments in 2 batches, was, one payment going to Diamond Hill, and the other payment going to Blackhead Consulting. I certainly didn't interrogate, like I said, I didn't see the part where he says the ones highlighted in yellow must be paid by you and so forth. I didn't get into those details.
Yeah, because you see that email says, please note that payments highlighted in yellow are the ones you will take care of.
Yes.
And the rest, us, that is Pambani, Mr. Pambani.
Yeah.
Then it says, as discussed. That's what he's saying. He says,
Correct.
he discussed it with you.
Yeah.
I have effected the payments in 2 batches. I may be wrong, but I understand that to be him saying, as far as my ones are concerned, I have effected payments in 2 batches.
Yeah.
Kindly find attached the schedule.
Yeah. So, Chair, this particular email, in particular this one, I only started looking at it and reading it properly when we started having these interviews with the investigators, because I went back to my history of the emails. And I realized the emails that, sometimes it happens, the emails that come through that you ignore, okay? It happens from time to time. Others, you probably maybe read the first line and you leave it there. It just so happened that this particular email, I only got to interrogate and look at it only last year. And had Mr. Mpambani been alive last year, I'm sure I would have asked him. I said, listen, there is this particular email which is posing a challenge for me. I didn't look at it at the time, but please explain what you meant. But already, unfortunately, he wasn't there for me to be able to ask him that question. But I acknowledge that I did not go through this email at all.
Mr. Pretorius.
Two points before we go back to the spreadsheet. You seem to have forgotten the payment to Mr. Jimmy Tao, which I think you've conceded, that he was paid an amount of 3 million rand from the proceeds of the asbestos audit.
What I mentioned was Mr. Tao was employed by Blackhead Consulting in the role of a business development consultant. This happened just after he stopped playing. So I had known him for a number of years before that. And when he stopped, he came to me and said, look, I'm no longer playing soccer and I want to get into business. Of course, he was someone that I knew, and I decided to appoint him as a business development consultant. So his appointment was with Blackhead Consulting, specifically. And what I meant in my statement was that his payment, the payment that was due to him, only got paid to him once we received funds from the asbestos. So I was in possession of funds at the time from the asbestos project. But that payment is not related to his involvement in the asbestos project, because he was never involved. But it just so happened that over a number of months, I wasn't able to pay him because I was not in possession of funds. So it was only when I started receiving payments that I started paying him. So it was an arrangement that we had. It was specific that he will be paid a certain amount of money per month. That was reduced in writing. We signed a contract to that effect, and he was paid by Blackhead Consulting.
Do you mean that for some time before the asbestos money came in, Blackhead was supposed to have paid him, but
That's
had
correct.
not paid, but had not paid him
That's correct, Chair.
because it didn't have
Funds.
enough money. Is that right?
That's correct, Chair.
Okay.
If one goes back to FS 8066, the cost of business schedule, or the spreadsheet as we've called it today, you'll see halfway down the column on the left-hand side, or just after halfway, the initials JT and 3 million rand. Those initials reflect Jimmy Tao, I think you've conceded.
Chair, I said I assume, I cannot confirm for sure. I cannot with absolute conviction say that those initials refer to Jimmy Tao.
Well, perhaps you can, Mr. Sodi, because the 3 million rand you've conceded was paid to him from the proceeds of the income of the project.
That's correct, yes.
So JT, Jimmy Tao, or Mr. JT was paid 3 million rand, we know that. Is it simply coincidence that Jimmy Tao has initials of JT? Who else?
No. I'm saying that I cannot with absolute conviction say that, because in any event, Chair, the purpose for the spreadsheet, and I'll just go back to this point slightly so that you know it's made clear. The purpose for the spreadsheet was to record the income and expenses of the asbestos project. Period. Jimmy Tao was not involved in the asbestos project.
So why was it recorded here then?
That's why I'm saying I cannot with absolute conviction, Chair, say that refers to him. It could be that it refers. Mr. Mbabane knew. I think we probably had this discussion before. That I had funds I had owed Mr. Jimmy Tao for the services that he had rendered. Okay, he knew that because we ultimately became acquaintances, the three of us. So he knew. But why he would have recorded it here, if that was meant to be him, it's beyond me, because the spreadsheet we discussed was only supposed to refer to the expenses of the project.
But, well, this goes to the question of you not knowing whether JT is Jimmy Tao or refers to Jimmy Tao. Wouldn't you know anybody who was going to be paid 3 million rand out of this partnership? Could there be somebody who was going to be paid 3 million rand out of your partnership with Mr. Mbabane, and you don't know who that person is?
Absolutely not, Chair. Hence
You
I'm
would know
saying
everybody.
I would know
was going to be
everybody.
paid, yes.
Hence I'm saying that it's, when I was presented with the spreadsheet last year, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, but I cannot with authority verify what is in this spreadsheet. I can't, because there are some things that make sense in the spreadsheet, and there are some things that just don't make sense at all.
Yes, but you did say that the purpose of the spreadsheet was to identify the costs that would be paid by the business, the joint venture. What was going
That's
to
correct.
be paid out of the asbestos money, basically.
That's correct, Chair.
Yes. And in that email that we referred to earlier, Mr. Mbabane says it refers to a discussion between the two of you about payments. You remember that?
Yes.
Yes. It just seems strange that he would write people to be paid on such a spreadsheet done for the purpose that you have told me about,
Yeah.
but people that you don't know
That's
when you are a partner in the business,
that's precisely the point, sir.
especially if it's not very small amounts.
Yeah.
Maybe 3 million is not such a big amount to
You-
certain business people,
Yeah, yeah.
but it just seems to me that he would write in the spreadsheet information or names of people that he knew you would know. Because otherwise, what was the point? Because the point of the spreadsheet, as you indicate, it was for both of you. You had to understand who is going to be paid what, so that you are able to say the total cost comes to so much. So our profit is so much, and I'll get 50% of that.
Correct.
And obviously, if he is going to write something that you don't know, you are going to say, but who's this?
That's precisely
And,
what I've done.
And here, if JT is not Jimmy Tau, it would be strange that that is so when you say there is 3 million rand that you owed Jimmy Tau and you paid, and here we've got JT and we've got 3 million rand.
Yeah. Chair, I've actually, his fees came to more than 3 million. It wasn't 3 million.
Yes, okay.
It came to more than that.
Yes.
But, Chair, the point I'm making here is the first time I got to be made aware of this spreadsheet was last year, in 2019, when it was presented to me by the investigators. That was the first time. It's just unfortunate that the person who offered it wasn't there, because I would have said to him, Mr. Mpaman, I see this spreadsheet that you prepared. Please take me through so I can understand what you meant by the entries that are reflected on this particular spreadsheet.
But the spreadsheet that the two of you spoke about on the particular day,
Yeah.
and you said you were having a meeting
Yes.
on that day, another meeting.
Yeah.
Did he never present it to you? Is it
No.
not this one?
No, Chair, he didn't. So we discussed. So we met and we said, okay, fine, this is going to be the revenue. So we know what the revenue is going to be, because it's, you know, it was given, okay? We knew how much master trade was going to be paid, okay? We knew how much material was going to be paid, and so forth and so forth. And those are the expenses. Those are the only expenses that we discussed. So when I left him to prepare it, when I went into another meeting, it was on the understanding that it was going to capture the conversation and the discussion that we had. As it turned out, when he left, he said, look, I've emailed it to myself because I'm going to do more work on it. I didn't read much into that as to what more work he could have been referring to. So I left it there, okay? And that was it until last year when I was presented with this.
So, as I understand it, the day on which you were speaking, you had a conversation with him about a spreadsheet, and the day when he was preparing a spreadsheet in your office was in 2014, or was it 2015?
I think it was 2014. I think it was 2014.
2014.
Yeah.
And
I cannot recall the exact dates, but I think it was.
Yeah.
It was 2014. Yeah.
And he passed on in 2017, 2016.
2017, I think. 2017. Yeah.
2017.
Yeah.
So are you saying that for over a year, maybe even 2 years, you never asked him about the spreadsheet that he was supposed to produce.
No, because the information, like I said, the information was pretty straightforward in terms of what expenses we're going to incur. It wasn't lengthy where, for instance, I would have said, you know what, I have to go through item by item and look at the amounts. It was pretty straightforward. The biggest cost, Chair, was for the
Master
subcontract,
Trade.
and the other ones were small amounts.
Yes,
So-
but is your answer, yes, I never asked him?
Correct, sir.
Yes, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Sodi, I would have thought that if Mr. Mpambani of the joint venture was tasked to prepare the spreadsheet or the document which showed the expenses of the business, which would have to be deducted before you could receive your profit, that you would be interested at the very least in that document and its accuracy.
That's correct, Chair. It
Because
was,
we're talking tens of millions of rand here.
we talking a lot of money, but we're talking, Chair, maybe 3 line items as expenses. So I could immediately calculate on top of my head that if the cost and the expenses are amounting to 49 or 48 million, if you minus that from the total revenue, this is the amount that will be left. So it wasn't a complicated exercise at all, to make that sort of determination.
But why would you need a spreadsheet then? Why did you need a spreadsheet then?
Because, Chair, we need to make sure that the amounts are recorded, okay? And we keep that as a record, that it has to be recorded somewhere. That was the feeling, that we've got to record that elsewhere to know that these are the amounts that must be paid, so that when it comes to payment, for those subcontractors, then we know exactly how much must be paid.
But
So that
that's-
was really the purpose.
But that's why Mr. Pretoria says, and I think you agree,
Yeah.
one would expect that you'd be interested to check that document to see whether Mr. Mpambani has correctly recorded the position, because you intend to use it for the future.
Correct, sir, especially for payments. Yeah.
But what is extraordinary, quite frankly, let me try and maintain the level of politeness that we've maintained thus far, Mr. Sodi.
Okay.
What is quite simply extraordinary is that a businessman dealing with a contract worth 255 million rand would not want to see the record. You've acknowledged now that it's important to have these matters recorded accurately, and you don't want to see it. And the first time you see it is several years later when investigators come and visit.
Chair, again, as I'd indicated, it was not something that was difficult to calculate at all. And that's why for me,
That
It-
is assuming
yeah,
that the spreadsheet Mr. Mpambani prepared was in accordance with your understanding. That
Precisely.
is assuming.
That's
But until you see
precisely.
the spreadsheet, you don't know whether that's what he has done.
yes, Chair, the assumption was that what was going to be recorded is a discussion that we had about those expenses and the revenue and so forth. Okay? And I already knew, even before I went into my meeting, I already knew that we've got a quotation from Master Trade, which was a certain amount. We knew how much we were going to pay Martin, and we knew how much we were going to pay Steve. So it was a simple thing. It was not difficult.
And it's important to see whether that's what Mr. Mpambani has recorded. Because if he has recorded something different,
Yeah.
you want to take it up with him.
So how I checked that, Chair, was through when the payments were made. So when the client paid, I made sure that in accordance to what we discussed, that those expenses are indeed paid to Master Trade and the two gentlemen that we're referring to. And that happened. And so beyond that, it was not an issue for me because most of those payments were actually,
Mr. Pretorius?
paid.
Well, in our view, the more probable version might appear in the transcript of your interview and in your statement at paragraph 39.25 on Free State 1, FS 1399. You say, with the benefit of hindsight, I should have asked Mpambani about the letters and or names that appear on the spreadsheet, but at the time I did not do that. That statement presumes, or assumes rather, that you saw the spreadsheet at the time, but you didn't ask Mpambani about the letters or names that appear on it.
Chair, what I acknowledged are two things. I acknowledge that there was a spreadsheet that we discussed. The contents of what ultimately came out is different to what we agreed on. I also acknowledge that there is a spreadsheet that was emailed to me. Okay? But further to that, I also acknowledge that I should have, with the benefit of hindsight, I should have opened the spreadsheet and interrogated it, which is something that I didn't do. Because had I done that, then I would have been able to say, but hang on, this is not what we discussed. There seem to be other entries on this spreadsheet, which I'm not aware of. Do you mind to take me through this entry so that I can understand what it's all about? And that's what I meant by that.
Well, my understanding of the instruction or the advice from the investigators is that what was sent to you by Mr. Mpambani together with those emails that we've discussed, the draft one and the other one, that talked about items marked in yellow, the spreadsheet was attached. You've just confirmed that.
That's what I'm saying, sir.
Are you seriously saying, as a businessman, you didn't look at that spreadsheet at the time?
Chair, I did not look at it. I'm making the submission that I did not go through that spreadsheet at all.
Quite frankly, that's improbable. That a businessman who's dealing with now profits of hundreds of millions of rand for the joint venture does not look at the very document his partner has prepared showing that profit and what has to be deducted from the income.
Yeah. Chair, the simple answer to that, and I don't want to keep repeating the same point. The simple answer to that, Chair, was that the spreadsheet, according to my understanding and according to the discussion that we had, was a fairly simple document. Okay? The entries was probably 3 or 4 entries, and we knew what those entries were and the amounts. So if it was a lengthy document, for instance, Chair, that had a number of entries, I'm sure that I would have gone through it and interrogate. But I knew that, look, the highest amount that we're going to pay is Master Trade, and there's 1 or 2 amounts. So I left it there. But, and that's what I said, in hindsight, with the benefit of hindsight, I should have opened it and looked at it. But I said, I already know. So when it came through, I'm like, I already know. This is the assumption that I made, that I already know what it contains. I already know the figures. So it's pointless for me to look at it. And it happens that sometimes, like I said, you do go through some emails, sometimes you don't.
Well, in paragraph 39.25, you don't say, with the benefit of hindsight, I should have looked at the spreadsheet. You say, with the benefit of hindsight, I should have asked Mpambani about the letters and or names that appear on the spreadsheet, but at the time I did not do that. So your omission there was not to discuss the letters or names on the spreadsheet, not an omission of not looking at the spreadsheet at all.
Chair, the correct version that I'm submitting to the commission is that I did not look at the spreadsheet. And what I meant was that with the benefit of hindsight, I should have opened the spreadsheet. I should have opened the email because had I done so, then I would have been in a better position to go through it and interrogate it and get answers from Mr. Mpambani. And that is, Chair, the correct version.
Let's look what you said in your interview with the investigators. And if I may refer you to Free State 6, FS 6 at 332. Exercise is now permitted.
What page is that, Mr. Pretorius?
332, FS 6. Here you're discussing the email about which we're talking and the spreadsheet with the investigators, and if you want to take a chance to familiarize yourselves with the context, I'm sure you should do so. But let me first put to you at the bottom of page 332 of FS6, where against your name the following appears. Yes, the email was sent to me. Okay, it was sent to me, and all that I noticed was that these payments that we made, and I noticed that there was payment that came into my account, and I was happy with that, and that's where it ended. And then you later say you never discussed that with him between that time and the time he unfortunately passed away. But that statement is much clearer, that you looked at the spreadsheet. You noticed the payments on the spreadsheet, and you were happy with the contents.
Chair, again, I acknowledge that I received the spreadsheet, but I did not go through this. I did not interrogate it.
No. Sorry, let me not interrupt.
Okay. That there was a payment that came into my account, and that was payment which was the 50% share, of what was due to Blackhead Consulting. But the actual spreadsheet itself, I did not go through it, as I've stated.
Well, Mr. Sodi, there's a big difference between not looking at the spreadsheet at all, which is the impression you've given us, and not interrogating what you see on the spreadsheet. Which was it?
I'm saying that the email came through, Chair, and I could see the email had a spreadsheet. So I saw the spreadsheet. You can see when the email has an attachment. And that's what I noticed, okay? That there was a spreadsheet attached to the email. It was an Excel spreadsheet. But I did not open the spreadsheet at all. And this is what I'm referring to here, that in retrospect, I should have opened it, because had I done so, then I would have been empowered to say, but hold on, there is this spreadsheet which is different to the spreadsheet that we discussed. And at that point in time, I would have been able to then, have a discussion with Mr. Mpambani and say, please explain what you mean by this. So that didn't happen because I didn't open it and I didn't go through it. But I saw it as an attachment. That's what I'm referring to.
But what you say here on page 332, Mr. Sodi, is yes, the email was sent to me. Okay, it was sent to me. And all that I noticed was that these payments that we made, and I noticed that there was payment that came into my account, and I was happy with that. The clear import of what you're saying here is that you looked at the spreadsheet, you noticed certain things, and you moved on.
Chair, that's not entirely correct. I, again, point that the email came through from Mr. Mpambani with a spreadsheet. Okay?
I'm sorry, Mr. Sodi.
Yeah.
As you respond to that question,
Yeah.
just bear that in mind. Just bear in mind that Mr. Pretorius is not necessarily, Mr. Pretorius' question is not necessarily talking to what actually happened. He's talking to what the import is of what you said to the investigators when they were
Okay.
talking to you.
Yes.
So in other words, when you look at what is reflected here,
Yes.
does it mean what he says it means? That's the question. So
Okay.
he is inviting your comment to that,
Okay.
as opposed to what actually happened.
I see.
And
Okay.
of course, when he gives that meaning to this, it means that is what probably happens, because that's what you are saying. But
Okay.
your answer must talk to what is the meaning of what you said to
Okay.
the investigators.
All right. Thanks
Yeah,
for that, Chair.
yeah,
Thanks for that.
yeah. You can deal with it. Yeah, if you want him to repeat the question, because he's saying to
maybe
you,
should, yeah, so that
yeah,
I-
he's saying to you, his understanding of what you are saying here, or he's saying what you said to the investigators is ABC, and you must say, I agree, that's what I said, or I don't agree, that's not what it means, what is
get
here.
it.
Okay. Mr. Pretorius?
Chair, I'm going to have to find the page again, I apologize. Page 332, you say, Mr. Sodi, yes, the email was sent to me. Okay, it was sent to me. All that I noticed was that these payments that we made, and I noticed that there was payment that came into my account, and I was happy with that, and that's where it ended. The clear import of what is said here, and bear in mind what the chair has just pointed out, is that you looked at the spreadsheet and you noticed certain things on the spreadsheet.
No, Chair, that's not what I meant by this statement.
Well, do you concede that what you said was that you noticed certain things on the spreadsheet? Let aside what you might have had by way of mental reservation.
What I'm saying in this statement is that the spreadsheet was attached to the email. And I did not open or go through the details of the spreadsheet, but I also noticed there was an amount that was paid into the Blackhead account. And that would be in accordance with the agreement of the JV that we had. And that's what I meant simply by this statement, Chair.
Mr. Pretorius, we are at 5 minutes past 4. Let's talk about the way forward. I am quite happy to sit further. What would you like to see happen?
Well, Chair, it would be useful for the purposes of the investigation, whether that investigation ultimately involves the Free State Department or Mr. Sodi or the late Mr. Mpambani and his composition of the spreadsheet, for us to accept the offer of Mr. Sodi and ask him to produce his books for the period and his tax returns so that we can interrogate those, and he nods and he's quite willing to do that. It's quite important to give Mr. Sodi full extent of his offered cooperation so that we can deal with this thoroughly.
Yes, what does that say to the question of the way forward today?
Well, I know that these records are some years back, but they shouldn't be too long to get hold of, and we could come back in a few days' time.
So is your suggestion that we should stop for today and arrangements be made for him to come back some other time after that further investigation has been done? Or is your suggestion that we continue and cover whatever else we can cover today, and then when he comes back, we deal with whatever arises from the further investigation? Or what is your suggestion?
Well, I don't want to traverse the same territory twice, and we'll traverse the financial aspects at a later stage. There are other matters I can proceed with for an hour or so.
Okay. Mr. Sodi, from your side, you are quite happy that we continue for another hour?
Yeah.
Okay.
happy with that,
Your
Chair.
counsel has no problem? Yes.
We're happy to cooperate and proceed for another hour. There's no issue in that regard. We did anticipate that.
Yes.
The only issue that we do have is we will cooperate fully with providing the documents. We just need some assurance of confidentiality because it is the tax returns, and I think it does extend very wide. There's full cooperation, but as long as we're assured confidentiality, there's full cooperation.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, no, that's all right. We are going to then continue, but I think we should take a small break and then come back. Let's take a break. It's about 7 minutes past 4. Shall we come back at 20 past 4? We adjourn.
All right.
Oh.